All right. Welcome to Daily Power Parsha, December 25th edition. This is our daily look at the Torah reading, at the Torah portion. Today, this portion is Vayigash, and today is Friday, so we are going to cover the sixth and seventh readings of the aforementioned Vayigash. All right, so I'm about to share my screen with you, and we all can follow along. In the meantime, let's get up to date what we're talking about in the story. So Joseph has revealed his identity. He sent up word to his father to come down, to move the family. And after a little bit of apprehension, Jacob goes ahead with it. The move happens. And yesterday, we actually enumerated all of the names of the family, Jacob's family, that moved down to Egypt, 70 in total. We spoke about how there were actually 69. And the 70th was born at the border crossing, right? She was the mother of Moshe. Yocheved was her name. Little Yocheved was born at the entrance of Egypt, and her son served, again, spoiler alert, as the redeemer of Israel. Obviously, God is a redeemer, but the one on the ground who God worked with to facilitate the Exodus, and that happens through a bridge type of persona, someone who can help extricate someone in danger from that place, as we mentioned yesterday. All right, let's jump into the sixth reading. As Jacob prepares for the move, we have a very important verse, Genesis chapter 46, verse 28. Take a look. Oh, and Sandrine, welcome. Good to see you. Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to direct him to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen, which means what the Torah is telling us, that Jacob, the father, sends one of his sons. Which one? The leader's son. You know by now who the leader is. It's not the firstborn Reuben, right? Who's the leader of the tribes? Judah. He's the guy. He's the dude who's, sorry, Ray, but I know you were right on that. So Judah is the guy who is the leader of his brothers. He's the one who stood up to Joseph and demanded Benjamin's return, etc. So Jacob sends, and he's the one that Jacob trusted to take Benjamin in the first place. So Jacob sends Judah ahead of him to Egypt. In other words, the move to travel with the family and possessions and the moving trucks, it's going to take a little while. So he said to Judah, go quickly to Egypt and get the place set up so that when we arrive, everything is ready. But what exactly was there to set up? The apartments, the housing, the furniture, building the IKEA furniture. What was going on here? No. It was opening a yeshiva, establishing a place to study whatever Torah form they had then. That Rashi says, take a look at Rashi right here in the beginning. Lahoros, to direct him, clear a place for him, show him how to settle in it. Okay, that's the simple understanding of it is. Here we go. The Agadic interpretation is that there should be a teaching to establish for him a house of study from which teaching would emanate. In other words, he sends Judah to open up a yeshiva, a house of study, so that Torah would be there. And this prompts our sages to say that from the beginning, we always had yeshivot, we always had places of Torah study, thick or thin, Israel or Egypt, right, in person or on Zoom, it doesn't matter. There's always a yeshiva, there's always the need to study Torah, and not only is there a need once you're there and you realize that you need it, no. Jacob sends Judah before anybody's there. The first thing you open up in a community is a place to study. That's the foundation that the community is built on. All right, Donna, go ahead. Unmute.
Yes, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but
don't
remind me, what was Judah's role initially 22 years ago in, exiling Joseph?
Excellent question. Judah was the one who said, why should we leave him to die in a pit? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So it was Reuben who said, don't kill him, put him into a pit. But he would have died in that pit. It was Judah who said, don't leave him to die in the pit with snakes and scorpions. What do we get from that? let's just move him away from us. If we don't like him, then let's just get rid of him. Now, look, could Judah have said, hey, guys, stop, we're done, finish. You threw him into the pit, fun's over, or whatever it is. You got scared, we scared him. Let's take him out and let's go home. Yeah. Should he have said that? Yeah, probably. But then I guess Egypt would have never happened. And, history is, altered forever. It's like Back to the Future. The moment you make one move, the pictures disappear. If you recall that series. Anyway, back to our parsha. So Judah opens up the yeshiva. And again, the message is you got to have a place to study Torah. And that is at the forefront of what it means to have a community. A Jewish community needs a place to study. Listen, I know what we do here is we study and teach Torah. That's what we do. And look, all right, I'm not going to do my spiel, but I'm not going to do it, but I'm doing it, right? From the beginning, pandemic hits, what's the first thing that happens? We establish a place to study Torah before anything else, right? March, whatever it was, middle of March, right there. Pandemic, I think I sent an email to our designer within like the first day. Here's a list of the classes. Everything's online. We're adding more classes. If you recall, we did Mimer Mondays, Talmud Tuesdays. Remember that? In the glory days, the first weeks? Who remembers that? Cooking with Rabbi Ari. Yeah, every day. Every day, every night. We had at least two. We had at least two things a day. But look, it's not a chiddush. It's not a novelty. It's not like anyone came up with it. It's from the beginning, from the establishment of the Jewish, even before we officially were a people. We were just a family then. The first thing that happens, you're going to Egypt. What about the yeshiva? Where are we going to study? You got to set that up first. So he sends Judah not to open up a kosher market, not to open up not about the food and not about the plumbing. It's not about anything else. I'm trying to think of other things that he could have been sent ahead to do.
JCC.
You're right, exactly. It's the one role, and that is got to have a place to study Torah. All right.
Rabbi.
Yes, Ray.
Don't you also, to make a community, have to have a mikvah?
Yes, but I guess they were in denial. Hey-o.
Oh, very cute.
I guess they had water, so they made a plan otherwise. But yeah, yes. A mikvah is very important. In fact, it's very, very important that you mentioned that. A mikvah, which is of course the ritual purification bath, a mikvah is so important that it says in Jewish law that if you don't have a mikvah, you sell your Torah scrolls in order to build the mikvah. If you say, we don't have money to build a mikvah, all right, so sell one of your Torah scrolls and build a mikvah. Not that you should be looking to sell Torah scrolls. You should look to pay for it otherwise and build it for the community. But that just demonstrates and exemplifies the specialty of mikvah. Okay, let's continue because again, we have a lot to go through and just incredible in these last two readings of this portion. Okay, here we go. Verse 29, and Joseph harnessed his chariot and he went up to meet Israel, his father. So you see what's going on. So Israel/Jacob, same guy, is coming down to Egypt. So Joseph went up to meet, in other words, he met him, I don't know if it's halfway, but he met him along the journey. He didn't just sit back and say, I'll wait for my dad to arrive. He went to journey him. And he appeared to him and he fell on his neck and he wept on his neck for a long time. So Joseph, this is it. This is the ultimate, after 22 years, that's it. Father and son reunited. He goes up to meet his father. Joseph falls on his neck and he cries on his neck for a long time. By the way, notice the Torah doesn't say that Jacob cried on Joseph's neck. It just says that Joseph cried on Jacob's son, cried on the father's neck, but it doesn't say the father cried on the son's neck. Why? Take a look at Rashi. Jacob, however, neither fell on Joseph's neck nor kissed him. Why not? Our sages say that he was reciting the Shema. He was in the middle of reciting the Shema, so he didn't want to interrupt it by crying or hugging. He was respectful to the Shema, And that was it. So although and I'm sure later on he expressed the emotion, but at that moment he was reciting the Shema. By the way, the Rebbe asked the question, after 22 years, he times his Shema right when his son is approaching? You got to be kidding me. After 22 years of absence, of longing for his son, he and his son are finally reunited. Jacob is saying the Shema. So if you want to look at it on a deeper level, what Jacob was trying to do was channel the love that he felt for his son and the fierce devotion, the fierce longing that he felt for his son, and that joy and ecstasy. I'm not even giving justice to all the emotions that must have been coursing through his body then, Jacob's body, upon, getting ready to meet his son. At that moment, he said, let me channel that, not for just me feeling my feelings, but channel it toward Hashem in appreciation. So he said the Shema in that moment, and when he was done, you better believe he hugged and kissed his son and cried. But at that moment, it's a beautiful lesson that he went to channel his human emotions toward a divine calling. And this is in general our calling in life, which is to leverage our excitement, joys, happiness, whatever, in also a spiritual way. Hope that makes sense. Let's continue. Verse 30. And Israel is the same thing as Jacob. Israel said to Joseph, father to son, I will die this time. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing, but it's the expression, it's a little weird. I will die this time. I wouldn't translate it like that. Since I have seen your face, that you are still alive. In other words, like basically saying at this point, I can die. In other words, I've seen you. I know you're alive, reunited. You're okay. I can die in peace. Basically, that's what he's saying. Because up until now, the implication is for the last 22 years, he was tortured. He was absolutely tortured by the loss of his son. Now he knows his son is alive and his son is okay and his son is successful. Even though he wasn't a doctor, right? Because usually Jewish parents and doctors, it's a very important thing. But he wasn't a doctor, but there was an exception made. After 22 years, you'll take what you can get. Viceroy, fine. By the way, you know the story along these lines. I have to stop sharing to tell you the story. You know the story about the first Jewish president. The first Jewish president is elected. This is a fictional story, by the way, in case you're wondering. So the first Jewish president is elected. And the president, that night of the election, he's confirmed. And he calls his mother, says, Ma, I won the election. She says, all right, congratulations. He says, you're not excited? Sure, I'm excited. So I want to invite you to the inauguration. Inauguration, I have nothing to wear. Nothing to wear. Listen, I'll send clothes. I'll send a tailor. Well, you got to be there. All right, I'll be there. Day of the inauguration comes. She's sitting there in the audience, and he's up there, and he's got some family members behind. No. So he's up there on the podium. So the mother is there in the audience. She turns to the person next to her, and she says, "You see that young man up at the podium? His brother's a doctor." Anyway, so that's the joke that's told about how much Jewish mothers and parents in general are into doctors. But nonetheless, Jacob says, although he's not a doctor, he's the viceroy, but still, I'm okay with him. He's a good guy. So that's the expression.
Rabbi, there's going to be a second gentleman in the White House.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Kamala Harris's husband.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, let's get back to the text. Here we go. And we did that one. So here we go. 31. Joseph said to his brothers, listen to this. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household. So they had a team meeting on the ground in Egypt. Okay, everyone gather in. We got to talk. Strategizing, because they got to deal with Pharaoh. Pharaoh's a wild card. He's been nice and whatever, but he's still Pharaoh. He's not mishpacha. Joseph says, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and I will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. In other words, I will let him know that you arrived. And I will tell him that the men, my brothers, the men are shepherds, for they were always owners of livestock, and their flocks and their cattle, and all they have brought. And if it comes to pass, so I'm going to tell him that you guys are shepherds, which, by the way, the implication of that is you don't have time to get involved in other activities, to be drafted by whatever Pharaoh wants, whether it's military or whether it's building projects or pyramid schemes. No, we're shepherds and we have our flocks and we're very busy. And if it comes to pass that Pharaoh calls you and asks, what's your occupation? You shall say, same line, toe the same line. Your servants, we have been owners of livestock from our youth until now, both we and our ancestors, so that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, because all shepherds are abhorrent to the Egyptians. In other words, the Egyptians were not into shepherds for whatever reason. So just say you're shepherds, and you'll remain a little bit isolated. Now, I need to explain. 1 second. So, can you guys see me? Yeah? Okay. Sometimes we think of isolation as being a bad thing, right? Sometimes we think of isolation, Jewish isolation, as being a bad thing. I don't mean like COVID isolation. I mean Jewish isolation, right? We want to be integrated in the nations. We want to be, counted amongst the populace. We want to assimilate and be part of whatever host nation we're living in. And there's value to that 100%. However, there's also value in remaining a little bit separate, just enough to keep us honest and to keep everyone else honest. Not saying a ghetto, but there is value in keeping somewhat of a buffer or a distance. Joseph knew that the moment they would integrate and assimilate into Egyptian society, the tsaras, the problems would begin. And that's exactly what happened. How does slavery begin for the Jew in the Jewish experience? Slavery in Egypt began when Pharaoh was recruiting people for his building projects, and the Jews put up their hand to volunteer. This is a generation or two after that original generation that moved down. So this is, the grandkids and the great-grandkids, they raised their hand. Sure, we're good citizens, we'll participate. And slowly, the screws were tightened and the noose was tightened, so to speak, around the Jewish people. And it went from volunteering to mandatory work to slavery and torture and murder and infanticide and all the horrors that we know about the Egyptian exile and the Egyptian slavery experience. It all begins by raising the hand and saying, hey, we want to be like you guys. We want to show you that we're loyal. So then we're going to jump into all these things, but they don't look at you the same way. Pharaoh doesn't look at you as one of them, because the moment Pharaoh is feeling a little bit nervous, he's going to blame the Jews. He says, that's the Jewish problem. The Jews are going to gang up again. The Jews are getting too numerous. They're getting too powerful. We have to be wary. We have to keep them down. So you think you're doing everybody a favor by, fully integrating and assimilating. And the reality is, doesn't always work out. I mean, in modern times, ask the Jews of Germany, right? How did that work out? There was no more of an assimilated people. And I'm not saying that's why it happened, God forbid. What I'm saying, though, is it didn't help. All of the connections and all of the accolades and all of the heads of industry, heads of academia, heads of science, heads of medicine, heads of art, heads of music. And Hitler did not care, did not make a difference. You're connected, doesn't make a difference. So oftentimes, our history has proven to us that it's good to be a little bit separate, a little bit cautious, a little bit, all right, this is just know where you are, know your surroundings. Joseph was very concerned. The first meeting that he has with his mishpacha, the first meeting, he sits him down and he says, guys, you're shepherds. And you're shepherds. That's what's going to be. Because shepherds can do their own thing and remain in their own little space. And that's going to be the healthiest setup. Hey, Riva, you want to show your little squishy, squeezy situation? Look at that guy. Look at that guy. What is that even? Is it a cat?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's a cat.
Meow.
Oh, she's cuddling with it. It's so cute.
Nice.
Oh, it's such a cute.
Yeah.
Squishy.
It's squish. It is squishy.
It's soft.
It is very soft. I felt it before. Let me feel it now. Oh yeah. And I'm pretty sure this is some sort of, it looks sort of like a cat. I'm going to say it's a cat-ish, cat-inspired. Are the eyes following you wherever it goes? You're getting sleepy. Joking. Okay, here you go. Hug your cat or hug your squishy, and let's get back into the text. So Joseph preps the brothers. They got to be on the same page. Here we go. Genesis chapter 47. Let's see how it plays out on the ground. Joseph came and told Pharaoh, and he said, my father and my brothers and their flocks and their cattle and all that is theirs, they've come from the land of Canaan, and behold, they're in the land of Goshen. In other words, he finally he now delivers the message that he told his brothers he was going to do. He now speaks to Pharaoh, his boss, and he says, my family's here. And he mentions, by the way, the flocks and the cattle. He mentions the shepherding, he alludes to it. And from among his brothers, Joseph took 5 men. He took 5 of his brothers and he presented them before Pharaoh, right? So a sampling of the brothers. Some say he took the weakest of his siblings so that Pharaoh doesn't get any ideas about soldiers or construction people. Some say he took the strongest so that Pharaoh doesn't start up with them. Different opinions as to which 5 he took. But he took 5 of his brothers. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? Remember, we practiced this a moment ago. What is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and our forefathers. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn. We have come to dwell in the land, for your servants' flocks have no pasture, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. In other words, we're shepherds, and our animals can't eat because there's a famine where we come from. Now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Wow, executed perfectly, right? They had a script, and boy, did they nail it. Look at that script. They nailed it. We are shepherds. Our sheep need food, and we're here because you guys have food. And can we have Goshen? Sure. That's well done. And Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is open before you. The best of the land. In the best of the land settle your father and your brothers. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know that there are capable men among them, make them livestock. Oh, there's a string attached. And if you know that there are capable men among them, always an angle, let them make them livestock officers over what is mine. In other words, I even give them my livestock to officer over, whatever that means, whatever needed to be done to oversee that. Pharaoh's like, well, maybe they can help with my animals. Anyway, you see where this is going. Pharaoh's always looking for an angle and for help and for, I'll give you this, you give me that. Always a negotiation. All right, let's continue. So Joseph now brought his father Jacob. So he introduced his Pharaoh to 5 of his brothers. And now, here's my dad. I want you to meet my father. So Joseph brings his father Jacob and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob greeted Pharaoh. After all, Pharaoh was the king. So Jacob greets him. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? How old are you? And listen to the answer. This will shock you. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years. In other words, I'm 130 years old. I've wandered the earth, or I've lived here on earth for 130 years. The days of the years of my life have been few and miserable. Wow. Look at this. Few and miserable. And they have not reached the days of the years of the lives of my forefathers in the days of their sojournings. In other words, I haven't yet reached the number of years and the tranquility that my father and my grandfather have experienced in their life. I mean, Abraham had a colorful life and he did a lot of traveling, but no one had the amount of tsaros. No one had as much drama as did Jacob. Joseph had his fair share, certainly, but of the patriarchs, no one had as much drama as Jacob. If you think about it, Jacob grew up with a rival twin. He ran away from the rival twin when he wanted to kill him, when his twin wanted to kill him. He was by Laban for 20 plus years, dealing with the treachery and the just mishagas of Laban and his attempts. He then dealt with the drama with the abduction and the rape of his daughter. He then dealt with, you're talking about so many different things that he did. And then Joseph, so he says, the days of the years of my life have been few and miserable. Ma'at, few, v'ra'im, and sad or bad. Let's see if there's Rashi on this. Sad or bad. Let's see what Rashi says about this. Rashi says, nope, no Rashi on this. Yeah, and I've not reached the days of my forefathers. And that means Rashi says in goodness. In other words, I've lived 130 years, but it hasn't. All right, here we go. Oh, take a look at verse 10. I'm going to keep Rashi up. So after he tells him how old he is, and he does a little, I'm not saying this critically, I'm just saying he fetched a little bit. After that, what happens next? Final verse of this reading. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left Pharaoh's presence. So Rashi says, let's take a look at Rashi together. According to the custom of those who leave the presence of princes, that they bless them and take their leave. In other words, when you're in the presence of royalty, before you leave, you wish them, give them a bracha, and then you leave. You don't just walk out. And what was the bracha? Now, what blessing did he bless him? Here we go. That the Nile River should rise at his approach, because Egypt does not drink rainwater, but the Nile rises and waters it. And so in other words, it works when the Nile overflows, the water then is channeled to irrigate the fields. So a high Nile River is good for the crops, is good for Egypt. So Jacob's blessing to Pharaoh was that when Pharaoh approaches the Nile, it should overflow at his presence, and give that blessing to the land. And ever since Jacob's blessing, Pharaoh would come to the Nile and it would rise to greet him and water the land. By the way, at this moment, this miracle happens with the Nile River for Pharaoh. And at this moment, guess what else ends? The famine. The famine is done. The moment Jacob blesses Pharaoh, the famine is done. 2 years in, and it's done. It never reaches 7 years. This is not, you might miss it if you just read the Torah's narrative, if you don't have the commentaries and you don't put all the pieces together. But here's what happens. All of this transpired 2 years into the 7 years of famine. In Egypt, the famine stops with the blessing. That's how powerful Jacob was. And by the way, that's why when Jacob passes away in next week's Torah portion, we're going to read about it. Pharaoh does not want him to be buried out, does not want him to be transported back to Israel. He wants to keep Jacob right where he is because he's been such a blessing to the land. All right, let's jump into reading number 7. All right, here we go. And Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and he gave them property in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had mandated. You're probably wondering, Ramses, what happened to Goshen? Ramses, that is part of the land of Goshen. In other words, it's like either a neighborhood in a larger city or a community in a state, whatever. It's geographically. It's like, are you in Atlanta? Are you in Virginia Highlands? Are you in, Midtown, Buckhead, Toco Hill? Is it Toco Hill or Toco Hills? We never know. Is it, are you in North Druid Hills? Are you in Ansley Park? Are you in Century? Where would you be? What would you be considered?
Where I live?
Yeah.
Ponce Island. Ponce Highland.
Yeah, Ponce Island, yeah. Good. I think also Chabad might also be considered Ponce Highland. But yeah, or Stone Mountain, like where are you? So look, that's kind of like the neighborhood. So Ramses and Goshen, it's not a contradiction. It's all, one is the smaller, one is the large area. Okay, whatever. Let's continue. And Joseph, let's get back to the story. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and his father's entire household with bread, according to the young children, which means he fed them what they needed. Let's continue. Now, there was no food in the entire land. Oh, by the way, okay, one second. Here, verse 13. Look at Rashi. Scripture returns to the earlier topic, to the beginning of the famine years. In other words, at this point, we're stopping the narrative. The families come down. The Torah stops, puts the narrative on pause, and rewinds as to what life was like in the first 2 years of the famine. Because, like I just told you, the famine ended with Jacob's arrival and that blessing. But what had been going on those prior 2 years outside of the Joseph brothers buying food, drama, Benjamin set up story, what was it like in Egypt during the famine? The Torah describes that right now. Let's get back in the text. Now, there was no food in the entire land in those first 2 years, for the famine had grown exceedingly severe, and the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan were exhausted because of the famine. Remember, Egypt had food stored away in the storehouses, but on the ground, it was also devastated by the famine. And Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan with the grain that they were buying. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So Joseph is getting a lot of money for Egypt, and he's bringing it to Pharaoh's treasure chests. Now the money was depleted from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan, and all these. In other words, the people who were spending money to buy food and paying the government to buy the food, they ran out of money. The money was depleted. At a certain point in time, no one had any more money to buy food. And in Egypt or Canaan, and all the Egyptians came to Joseph saying, "Give us food. Why should we die in your presence since the money has been used up? You have no more money to buy food." So what does Joseph say? Joseph said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock if the money has been used up." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in return for the horses and for the livestock and flocks and cattle and donkeys, and he provided them with food in return for all their livestock in that year. They basically gave him their livestock so that they can get food. That year ended. That was the first year. And they came to him in the second year, and they said to him, "We will not hide from my Lord, for insofar as the money and the property and animals have been forfeited to my Lord, nothing remains before my Lord except their bodies and our farmland." In other words, now we have no money and no animals. So that's it. It's just us and our land. So again, why should we die before your eyes, both we and our farmland? Buy us and our farmland for food, so that we and our farmland will be slaves to Pharaoh, and give us seed so that we live and not die, and the soil will not lie fallow. In other words, we're desperate, so you can own us and own our land. We'll do whatever it takes. We just need food. So Joseph bought all the farmland of the Egyptians for Pharaoh. This may not sound so nice, by the way, but this is the story that's told. So Egypt is now owning all the farmland. The privately owned farmland now belongs to Pharaoh. For the Egyptians sold each one his field, for the famine had become too strong for them, and the land became Pharaoh's. So now the government, or Pharaoh, owns all the land, and he transferred the populace to the cities. From one end of the boundary of Egypt to its other end, he kind of moved around, rezoned, reorganized things. Why is this? If I'm not mistaken, there's a Rashi on this. Let me see Rashi on verse 21. Let's see if there's a Rashi. Look at this. Look at this. He did it for his brothers. Joseph transferred them from city to city, the native Egyptians, so that they would remember that they have no more share in the land. And he settled those of one city in another city. Scripture did not have to write this except to let you know Joseph's praise, that he intended to remove the stigma from his brothers so that the Egyptians would not call them exiles. In other words, he didn't want his brothers to be looked at as the foreigners. So he made everyone into a foreigner. Are you with me on this? Everyone was displaced, not just his brothers. So, and again, this was even before they moved down, but he was anticipating just the upheaval. So he just was creating a little bit more for the benefit of his family. Let's continue. Verse 22, only the farmland of the priests he did not buy. Look at that. Interesting. For the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate their allotment that Pharaoh had given them. Therefore, they did not sell their farmland. So basically, the priests remained a little bit untouched. Egyptian priests, even though they weren't Jewish priests, but Joseph respected them and didn't mess with them. Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have bought you and your farmland today for Pharaoh. Behold, you have seeds to sow the soil. And it shall be concerning the crops that you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh." So not only does he own the field, and not only is he graciously giving you the seed to put in your fields, but when it does grow, you have to pay a fifth to Pharaoh. And the remaining 4 parts shall be yours. For seed your fields, for your food, for those in your houses, and for your young children to eat. So you can use whatever is left, the other 4/5 for yourselves. But we own the land, and our request is not all the food, right? But a fifth. That was his way of angling on this. They replied, "You have saved our lives. You're our hero. Let us find favor in my Lord's eyes, and we will be slaves to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute to this day. I don't know. Go visit Cairo and let me know if it's still to this day. But in the Torah's times, it was still to this day, concerning the farmland of Egypt for the 1/5. Only the farmland of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh. So in other words, what that means is that it was a longstanding tradition for many years in Egypt that a fifth of the farmland goes to the Pharaoh, goes to the government. Only the priests remain untouched. And Israel dwelt, back to our story, back to our narrative about Jacob and his family. And Israel, Jacob, dwelt in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen, and they acquired, maybe it's referring to the whole family. So they dwelt in the land of Egypt and specifically in Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and they were prolific and multiplied greatly. Prolific and multiplied greatly. That sounds wonderful, unless you're Pharaoh, in which case it might sound threatening. Nonetheless, this is the way this Torah portion ends. That's how the portion of Vayigash ends, on an interesting note. So a few things that I want to mention. Number one, it does seem like Joseph is brutal in his control over the situation in Egypt, over the food, right? I mean, he collects the food just with an iron fist in the 7 years of plenty, and the distribution is with an iron fist. I mean, he is not, sure, whatever you need, just take, we want to make sure everyone's okay. No way. Stimulus program, not under Joseph's rule. Again, sorry, I'm not getting political. I'm just saying that Joseph did not have this concept of giving out stuff. Joseph was not about that. He was like, you want it? You're going to pay for it. You have no money? I'm going to take your animals. No more animals? I'll take your land. I'll take you. I mean, I don't know that I'm going to be able to explain it in a nice way, but Joseph was brutal in his economic approach to the famine and to the Egyptians. It was intense. Now, did he give back the stuff after the famine? Is it just now that the land is privately owned, but you still have to do the fifth tax to the government, to the Pharaoh? I don't know. I'm sure the commentaries discuss it, and maybe even some Rashis that we didn't do have more of a conversation. But what does seem to arise are two things. Number one, Joseph wasn't afraid, or he didn't mind being very tough. And I'm not telling you how to feel about that, by the way. I want to be very clear here. You feel how you want to feel about it. We're learning the story. One thing to keep in mind, though, that one Rashi that we did do about this is that Joseph ultimately did this for his family's benefit, that they would feel less of a stranger when everyone else is a stranger in their own land. So the family is going to benefit by the general upheaval in the land. One more thing to mention. When the Jews leave Egypt, they took out all the money. Whose money did they take? You could call it Joseph's money. The money that Joseph had accrued. I mean, he cleaned out Pharaoh's coffers, and all of that was filled with the money that was facilitated by Joseph. So on one level, the money that the Jewish people took on the way out wasn't really, I guess it was originally also Egyptian money, but it was really Joseph's efforts that achieved that. On a spiritual note, we understand that money is symbolic of materialism and material resources. And there's two ways to look at resources. Either it's Egyptian money or it's Jewish money. And what I mean by that is either it's, money for the sake of money or for the sake of stuff, or it's for a higher purpose. Again, without getting into details of this particular story and how Joseph dealt with the people, in general, our goal is to transform material to the spiritual, to transform matter into spirit, to transform money as a means for stuff into money as a means, as a spiritual vehicle, as a means for spiritual light in this world. And so on some level, that's also what was happening, where Joseph was acquiring the wealth. Maybe he was uplifting it also somehow in the process. As we know in the mystical doctrine of the sparks, the idea is touching physical items to elevate them to a higher place. So some things to think about as we think about this interesting story. It's almost like a sidebar in the narrative. It's like we're really focused on the Joseph story and the Jewish people story and the Egypt origin story. Along the side over here, we're getting this, economic system that Joseph had set up. Interesting. All right, any comments or insights or questions? Jump in, please.
So the yeshivas that they built, I guess, before the Torah, what were they studying?
Excellent question. So it says, our tradition has it, that they had from the beginning, and when I say the beginning, I mean from the beginning, before Abraham. We're talking about like already in the times of Noah, from Noah's Ark, right? His son Shem, one of the three sons that he had, one of the survivors of the Ark, or survivors that survived on the ark. So he opened up a yeshiva. So they were studying something. They were studying some form of divine wisdom and divine will that would be the forerunner of what we know as Torah. Obviously, it didn't contain these stories that happened later, right? It's not like they're like, oh, hey, that's what's going to happen, right? So it wasn't like the narrative piece of it. And it wasn't necessarily as pragmatic as the mitzvahs that we have, but it was on some level, some elements of the Torah that we know, some incarnation of the Torah experience. And it says, from the earliest days, there were always those who were studying Torah. And I think the beautiful insight that we had today from the verse is, it's not just something we also do on the side, but it's at the heart of what a community is. Jacob says, all right, we're moving our family, our community to Egypt. First things first, we got to make sure Torah is being studied. We got to build the yeshiva. Again, whatever that was, but we got to make sure that that's happening. The study, that's the key. So hope that answers the question somewhat.
Ari, I've got a question.
Sure.
Because one thing doesn't make sense to me. Maybe that's just human nature. So there's a horrible famine that actually swept the earth, or at least swept that area. And with Joseph's management is what allowed people to survive. I guess he nationalized a lot of industry or crops, whatever.
Right.
But then what ended the famine, according to Rashi and the Midrash, is that was Jacob's blessing. So if you take a broad look at this, that means the Jews managed the famine so people wouldn't starve, and then Jacob ended it. So how could the Jews then be enslaved?
That's the $1 million question. After all we've done, how could there be anti-Semitism? Go ask an anti-Semite. They'll tell you why. They'll give you 1,000 reasons why. Oh, you know who started the famine? Oh, you think Joseph just happened to know? I feel like, you know, it's the story. It's the story of our history. You know, that the Jews bring very oftentimes tremendous blessing to places, and then the country turns around, the leadership turns around, or individuals turn around, and for everything there's blame. So what you're asking is, how can the world forget so soon, right? How can they not even forget? It's how can you look at someone who's benefited you and want to harm them or stab them in the back? How's that possible? Welcome to the world. I don't know what can I say. It's a crazy place.
I guess to me, this isn't just something good was done by a Jew or Jews. This was huge. This saved civilization for them.
100%. By the way, I have the same question. I'm not answering your question. I'm just saying that's how powerful, we'll just call it in the modern term, anti-Semitism is, you know, Jew hate is that even when ... there's still a possibility to hate. It doesn't make sense. And I'm with you that in Egypt, it was literally their lives were saved by Joseph and taking over the industry. I like the way you said it, by the way. I mean, it sounded much nicer than the way I said it, but whatever, right? That way of taking over the food and making sure everyone was, you know, et cetera, managing and overseeing it, and then literally stopping the famine and getting people back to their lives. And yet. What are you
more successful we are, than that people get upset.
Donna gives a beautiful idea. I mean, it's I think beautiful, maybe the wrong word, but a very, I think, accurate idea. And that is, maybe that's exactly the reason why. Because there's discomfort, maybe. The more you benefit, the more I don't like you, right? You saved me, I don't like you. By the way, this is not only true with, you know, with anti-Semitism, but it's true in general, by the way. Sometimes people, you know, someone helps them out, and the next thing is they're trying to tear them down, the one who helped them. It's a weird quirk in human nature, by the way. It's kind of like, I don't want to feel beholden to this person, So therefore, I'm going to conjure up in my mind why they're not so special, even though they help me. Does that make sense? So one time they say about a rabbi who helped someone out like in a very deep way. And he says, Rabbi, how can I repay you? He says, look, you don't have to give me anything. Just when you find yourself tempted to throw stones at me, pick up pebbles instead of rocks. That's it. Because it's going to happen. It's like, there's no way that you're just going to be, at some point it's going to be, oh, that guy, let me tell you. It's just go for the small pebbles and not the big ones.
You won't be throwing roses, but at least you'll be throwing pebbles.
At least the pebbles, at least not the big boulders from the, whatever. So I think there's a powerful truth about human condition and what Donna mentioned and this idea. And it's true with the Jew. Listen, is there an additional element with anti-Semitism? Sure. Yes. I would say that. I don't know. I saw an email, you ever get these email, like these chain email things? You know what I'm talking about, right? You could tell it's been forwarded like 1,000 times. So I got one recently. I read part of it. It was basically like how the vaccines that are being developed have a lot of Jewish, not input, but a lot of Jewish, I don't know, leadership or.
The chairman of the board of Pfizer is Jewish.
Right. So it was like, this guy's Jewish and this one who developed this is Jewish. Like it was going through like a whole list of all the, not all, but major players in the vaccines and the various, I think Pfizer and Moderna, and how there are Jewish connections there, like strong, very strong Jewish connections there. And saying basically like, we should be proud of our contribution, not only historically, but right now to getting everyone back, please God, healthy and back to normal. So I was just thinking along the lines of what you're saying, like you would think, well, if that's the case, everyone should love Jews. Right now, everyone should love Jews and others, right? I'm not saying only Jews, but also Jews. But it's more complicated than that. I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying that I'm not hopeful that would happen one day or even today, hopefully. But the fact that sometimes a person can hate even though we've been to this rodeo, this rodeo before, whatever the right way to say that. It's not the first rodeo.
Not my first rodeo, yeah.
Not my first rodeo, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, but listen, I want to give you all a blessing. We'll close it out for today. The blessing is that we should all be happy and healthy and successful with plenty of food to eat and no famines, and let the government only take what it takes a little bit, and not to still own our farms and own our land and own our cattle and own our livestock and our cats and our dogs and our pets. But no, on a serious note, we should all be healthy and happy and have what we need and be able to continue being part of this beautiful community. And I know I mentioned it before, but I think it's one of the stronger themes of today's discussion. Being a part of a Torah community, of a learning community, a Jewish study community is super, super important. It's the first community that was set up in Egypt was a Torah study community. So I'm grateful that you're part of this, and thanks for your participation and support for what we're doing. And I look forward to many continued opportunities to connect and study together and to inspire each other and to remain connected. And the camaraderie is also a big piece of it and a big part of that, big part of the family. So to you, my mishpacha, I want to wish you Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos, lots of good health, and happy Shabbos. We'll
Thank
see
you,
all.
Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Hey.
Shabbat Shalom. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so
See you
much.
soon.
We
Bye.
are
Shabbos.